On a quiet street lined with maple trees, where every house had its own story to tell, stood a charming two-story home with the most beautiful garden in the neighborhood. The sweet smell of roses and fresh-baked cookies often drifted from this special place, where Mr. and Mrs. Evans had built their life together for more than 40 years. The Evans weren't just any elderly couple. They were the heart and soul of Pine Grove Street. Mrs. Evans, with her silver hair always neatly pinned back and warm brown eyes that crinkled when she smiled, spent her mornings tending to her award-winning roses and vegetables. She had a special touch with plants, turning even the most stubborn seeds into blooming beauties. People would often stop by just to admire her garden, and she'd happily share her gardening secrets with anyone who asked. Mr. Evans, tall and distinguished with his neat gray mustache, was known for his incredible baking skills. Every Sunday, the smell of his famous honey butter rolls would fill the air, drawing neighbors from blocks away. He learned these recipes from his grandmother, who used to cook for some of the finest families in the South. The couple would set up a small table in their front yard, selling these delicious treats to raise money for the local children's hospital. Their home became a gathering place where neighbors could always count on finding a friendly face and a warm welcome. Children loved stopping by after school because Mrs. Evans always kept a jar of homemade cookies on her kitchen counter, and she never turned away a hungry child. Mr. Evans would often sit on their porch swing in the evenings, sharing stories about the neighborhood's history with anyone who cared to listen. As one of the first black families in the area, the Evans had seen their neighborhood change and grow over the decades. They remembered times when not everyone was welcoming, but they met uncertainty with kindness and prejudice with dignity. Through their unwavering grace and generous spirits, they helped transform their street into a place where people from all backgrounds came together as friends and neighbors. Their house stood out not because it was the biggest or the newest, but because of the love that went into maintaining it. The pale yellow paint was always fresh, the white trim gleamed in the sunlight, and the garden blooms created a rainbow of colors from spring through fall. String lights twinkled along the porch railing every evening, creating a magical atmosphere that made everyone feel like they were home. The couple's daily routine was a dance they'd perfected over 50 years of marriage. Every morning, they'd share breakfast on their porch, waving to neighbors heading to work. Mrs. Evans would work in her garden, while Mr. Evans prepared dough for his next baking project. They'd break for lunch together, sometimes joined by retired neighbors or local kids on school holidays. Their afternoons were often spent volunteering at the community center or helping organize neighborhood events. Their life wasn't extravagant, but it was rich with friendship, purpose, and joy. The Evans were living proof that the greatest wealth comes from building a community and sharing what you have with others. Their home wasn't just a house. It was a lighthouse of love and acceptance in the neighborhood, guiding people toward kindness and understanding. Little did they know that their peaceful world was about to face a challenge that would test not only their own strength, but the very fabric of their beloved community. Yet, even as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, the Evans porch light stayed on, ready to welcome anyone who needed a place to feel at home. The trouble began on a warm Tuesday evening when 5 teenagers from the wealthy side of town drove past the Evans' home in an expensive sports car. At first, their drive-bys seemed random, but soon their intentions became clear. These kids, who had never known a day of real hardship, started their campaign of cruelty with small acts that grew bolder by the day. The teens would slow down near the Evans property, playing loud music and shouting rude comments. They came from families who lived in the new luxury homes across the lake, where houses had 3-car garages and infinity pools. These kids had everything money could buy, except, it seemed, the simple human decency their elderly targets had in abundance. It started with littering. Empty soda cans and fast food wrappers mysteriously appeared scattered across Mrs. Evans' precious garden. Then came the late-night noise. Car horns blaring at 2 a.m., disturbing not just the Evans, but the entire street. The elderly couple tried to brush it off as teenage mischief, but their neighbors noticed the pattern forming. One morning, Mrs. Evans went out to tend her beloved roses and found crude words scrawled on paper signs stuck into her flower beds. Her hands trembled as she removed them before the neighborhood children could see. Mr. Evans, who had faced discrimination in his younger years, felt a familiar knot in his stomach. He insisted on installing security cameras, though the expense wasn't easy on their fixed income. The teens grew more daring when they realized the Evans wouldn't confront them. They started parking across the street, taking videos of themselves making racist gestures and posting them online. Their expensive clothes and perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the ugliness of their behavior. The security cameras caught everything: their faces, their car's license plate, and their increasingly bold acts of harassment. The situation worsened when they began targeting the Evans' weekly bake sale. They would drive by, pretending to be interested in buying something, only to knock over displays and laugh as they sped away. The money from these sales had always gone to the children's hospital, making their cruel pranks even more heartless. Other neighbors began noticing suspicious damage appearing overnight. Damaged mailbox posts, knocked over garbage cans, and garden lights that had been stomped on. The Evans home security system recorded the teens skulking around in hoodies, despite the warm weather, trying to hide their faces while vandalizing the property. Through it all, the Evans maintained their dignity. They cleaned up each mess without complaint, replanted destroyed flowers, and continued to greet everyone with kindness. But behind their brave faces, the stress was taking its toll. Mrs. Evans started keeping her curtains closed during the day, and Mr. Evans would stay up late, watching their security monitors with worried eyes. The teenagers seemed to take the couple's restraint as weakness, never realizing they were being recorded, never thinking about consequences. They didn't know that their license plates, faces, and actions were all being documented. They were too busy laughing at their own cruelty to notice that neighbors had begun keeping watch, taking photos, and making phone calls. Like many bullies, these teens had confused kindness for weakness. They didn't understand that the Evans' gentle response to their harassment wasn't fear, it was strength. The elderly couple had faced worse in their younger years and survived through unity and dignity. But this time, they wouldn't have to face the challenge alone. The community was watching, gathering evidence, and preparing to take action. As the teens planned their biggest act of vandalism yet, they remained oblivious to the fact that their every move was being monitored, not just by cameras, but by an entire neighborhood that had had enough. The karma they had earned was about to catch up with them in ways they never expected. The Evans' 50th wedding anniversary was meant to be a day of pure joy. Their front yard had been transformed into a celebration of love, with golden balloons dancing in the breeze and white chairs set up in neat rows. String lights twinkled overhead, creating a warm glow as the sun began to set. Photos from their 50 years together were displayed on carefully arranged boards, telling the story of their life's journey. Family members had traveled from across the country to be there. The Evans grandchildren ran around in their Sunday best, helping to set up decorations and sneaking cookies from the dessert table. Their daughter, a successful doctor, had spent weeks planning every detail to make this day perfect for her parents. Even their son, who rarely got time off from his job overseas, had flown in to surprise them. The community pitched in too. The local flower shop donated beautiful centerpieces, and neighbors brought covered dishes filled with hometown favorites. Mrs. Chen from next door arrived early with her famous dumplings, while the Rodriguez family from across the street set up a photo booth with handmade props. The whole street smelled like a mixture of delicious foods from different cultures, all made with love for the beloved couple. As guests started arriving, carrying gifts wrapped in gold paper and heartfelt cards, the Evans stood greeting everyone with tears of joy in their eyes. Mrs. Evans wore a beautiful pale blue dress she'd saved for this special occasion, while Mr. Evans looked distinguished in his best suit, the same one he'd worn to their children's college graduations. But just as the celebration was reaching its peak, with music playing and children laughing, the sound of screeching tires cut through the joy like a knife. The 5 teenagers had chosen this moment for their cruelest act yet. They jumped out of their car wearing masks, armed with spray paint cans and cartons of eggs. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The teens charged through the carefully arranged chairs, knocking them over like bowling pins. They sprayed hateful messages across the photo displays, their paint dripping over 50 years of precious memories. Eggs splattered against the house, ruining the decorations and splattering guests' nice clothes. Mrs. Evans stood frozen, watching as her anniversary celebration turned into chaos. The golden cake she'd spent hours decorating was knocked to the ground. Mr. Evans tried to step forward to protect his wife, but their daughter pulled them both back to safety. The grandchildren started crying, scared and confused by the sudden violence. But this time was different. This time, they weren't alone. A group of young neighbors who had been helping with the celebration immediately pulled out their phones, recording everything. Other guests rushed to protect the elderly couple, forming a human shield. Someone called the police, while others took photos of the teen's car as they tried to speed away. Through her tears, Mrs. Evans watched as her beautiful celebration lay in ruins. 50 years of marriage, celebrated with such love, now surrounded by broken decorations and hateful words. But then something remarkable happened. Without anyone saying a word, guests began picking up chairs and salvaging what they could. The children gathered fallen flowers, trying to piece centerpieces back together. The most heartbreaking moment came when their youngest grandchild, only 6 years old, looked up with wide eyes and asked, "Grandma, why do they hate us?" Mrs. Evans, who had remained strong through decades of challenges, finally broke down. Her tears weren't just for the ruined celebration, but for having to explain hatred to an innocent child. The police sirens could be heard in the distance, getting closer. The teens had made their biggest mistake yet, not realizing that this time their actions had been witnessed by dozens of people. They had crossed a line that would change not only their lives, but the entire community's response to hate and intolerance. This wasn't just about a ruined party anymore. This was about a community saying enough to hatred, about standing together against cruelty, and about showing that love and unity would always be stronger than fear and division. The karma that was coming would teach these teens a lesson they would never forget. The teenagers' world came crashing down faster than they could have imagined. The security cameras had captured crystal clear footage of their faces and their car's license plate. But what really sealed their fate were the dozens of cell phone videos taken by party guests, showing every moment of their cruel attack on the anniversary celebration. Their identities spread through the community like a wildfire. These weren't troubled kids from broken homes. They were children of privilege, students at the city's most expensive private school, where tuition cost more than most people's yearly salary. One was the son of a bank executive, another the daughter of a well-known surgeon. Their parents had given them everything except, it seemed, a moral compass. The school's headmaster called an emergency meeting after seeing the videos. The teens had probably worn their school jackets during the attack, bringing shame to an institution that prided itself on character development. Within hours, all 5 students were expelled. Their college acceptance letters to prestigious universities their parents had bragged about at country club dinners were withdrawn one by one. The police investigation moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming, not just from the anniversary attack, but from weeks of harassment captured on the Evans security cameras. The teens faced serious charges, with the district attorney pushing to try them as adults due to the hate crime nature of their actions. Their parents' first response was to throw money at the problem. They'd hired expensive lawyers and tried to paint the incidents as youthful mistakes and pranks gone wrong. But when local news stations aired footage of the anniversary attack, showing elderly Mrs. Evans crying as her celebration was destroyed, public outrage couldn't be contained. The consequences rippled through their families. The bank executive father was asked to step down from his position. The surgeon's practice lost patience. Country club memberships were quietly revoked. Families who had once welcomed them at their dinner tables now turned away. Their own neighbors, disgusted by attempts to downplay the crimes, started speaking out about past incidents they'd witnessed. One teen's college essay was found online, ironically writing about community service and treating others with respect. It went viral for all the wrong reasons, becoming a symbol of privilege and hypocrisy. The comments section filled with stories from other students who had experienced bullying from this same group. Two of the teens, watching their futures crumble, began to truly understand the weight of their actions. The reality hit them hard. Their college dreams were gone, their families were facing financial and social consequences, and their names would be forever linked to this ugly incident. They saw their younger siblings coming home crying because no one would play with them at school. Their phones, seized as evidence, revealed a history of racist messages and plans to target other minority families in the neighborhood. What they had seen as fun was exposed as a pattern of hate that shocked even their parents. The group chat logs showed them laughing about Mrs. Evans' tears, planning their attacks, and encouraging each other to be crueler. The local judge, known for his fairness, ordered them to not only pay for all damages, but also complete hundreds of hours of community service working with elderly residents. They would have to attend diversity education programs and write letters of apology to everyone affected by their actions. Their driver's licenses were suspended, their social media accounts restricted by court order. As they sat in their empty rooms, grounded indefinitely, these teens who had once felt so powerful began to understand true powerlessness. Their expensive clothes and cars meant nothing now. The community they had tried to terrorize was thriving, while their own lives had been turned upside down by their choices. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. These privileged teens who had tried to make others feel small had instead made themselves small. Their attempt to destroy an anniversary celebration had destroyed their own futures instead. It was a harsh lesson about consequences, privilege, and the power of community to stand against hate. In the quiet aftermath of the scandal, something unexpected began to happen. Two of the teenagers, shaken by the consequences of their actions, started showing genuine remorse. It wasn't the fake apologies their lawyers had suggested. This was real, soul-deep regret that changed them from the inside out. The younger of the two showed up at the local civil rights office one morning, tears streaming down her face. She didn't ask for forgiveness or try to excuse her actions. Instead, she asked how she could help prevent other young people from making the same horrible choices. The office director, though initially skeptical, saw something genuine in her eyes. Meanwhile, her friend spent hours reading books about civil rights history at the library. He learned about the struggles people like the Evans had faced throughout their lives. The more he read, the more ashamed he became of his actions. His wealthy parents had taught him about investing money, but they'd never taught him about investing in humanity. These two teens started speaking at local schools, not as heroes, but as cautionary tales. They shared their story honestly, describing how privilege and ignorance had led them down a dark path. In classroom after classroom, they faced tough questions from students their own age. Why did you think it was funny? How could you be so cruel to elderly people? They answered with painful honesty, their voices often breaking. Their former friends, however, took a different path. Investigation into their phones revealed a history of similar incidents against other minority families in nearby towns. They had filmed their acts of vandalism, sharing them in private group chats and laughing about their victims' pain. Each new revelation brought fresh charges and consequences. The two remorseful teens started a student organization called Breaking the Bubble, focused on helping privileged kids understand their responsibilities to the community. They organized volunteer days at nursing homes, wanting other teenagers to see elderly people as human beings with stories and feelings, not targets for cruel pranks. Local civil rights groups were initially hesitant to work with them, but their consistent efforts began to make a difference. They helped organize workshops about unconscious bias in wealthy neighborhoods. Their first-hand experience with privilege and its misuse made their message particularly powerful to other affluent teens. One day, the girl who had started it all asked to meet with a black student group at a neighboring school. Her hands trembled as she told them about her journey from ignorance to understanding. "I used to think being rich made me better than everyone else," she admitted. "Now I know that character is what really matters." Their parents, watching this transformation, began to question their own biases. Family dinner conversations that once focused on stock prices and country club gossip now turned to discussions about social responsibility and true community leadership. The teens were teaching their parents lessons about humanity that no private school had ever covered. The local youth center invited them to help create a program about bullying and hate crimes. They worked alongside kids they would have once looked down on, learning about different lives and perspectives. Their expensive clothes were replaced with volunteer t-shirts, their designer shoes scuffed from community service work. Their old social media accounts, once full of shallow selfies and brags about wealth, transformed into platforms for change. They shared resources about fighting racism, posted about their learning experiences, and encouraged other privileged teens to examine their own biases. Their followers watched in real time as these former bullies evolved into advocates for change. Not everyone believed in their transformation. Some saw it as an act to get lighter sentences or restore their damaged reputations. But day after day, they kept showing up, doing the work, facing the consequences of their actions with growing maturity. They didn't ask for praise or recognition. They simply tried to turn their mistake into a force for positive change. 6 months after the terrible incident, the Evans home looked more beautiful than ever. The garden bloomed with twice as many flowers, each plant representing a different neighbor who had helped replant it. The house gleamed with fresh paint and the same warm yellow shade they'd always loved, but now it seemed to shine brighter, like a symbol of hope. The community didn't just rebuild what was destroyed. They made everything better. The front yard now featured a beautiful wooden bench with a small plaque that read, "Love lives here." Every evening, people would stop by to sit with the elderly couple, sharing stories and watching the sunset together. The porch had been expanded to fit more chairs because there were always visitors dropping by. The Evans' 50th anniversary celebration was reorganized, bigger and more beautiful than before. This time, it wasn't just family and friends who attended. The entire neighborhood showed up. The local baker created a cake even more spectacular than the original, decorated with gold roses and tiny hearts. Children from the elementary school made hundreds of paper flowers to hang from the trees. But the most touching moment came when the town mayor announced a surprise. The street was being renamed Evans Way, in honor of the couple who had shown that love was stronger than hate. Mrs. Evans, usually so composed, burst into happy tears when the new street sign was unveiled. Mr. Evans stood tall, his arm around his wife, watching as their decades of kindness were recognized by their community. The incident sparked lasting change in unexpected ways. The neighborhood started a diversity council, with members from every background meeting monthly to discuss ways to make their community more inclusive. They created scholarships for underprivileged students and started mentorship programs pairing elderly residents with local teens. The Evans Sunday bake sales transformed into community festivals, with people from all cultures bringing their traditional foods to share. The smell of Mr. Evans' honey butter rolls now mixed with the aroma of tamales, samosas, and pasta sauce. These gatherings became so popular that they had to close off the entire street to fit all the tables and visitors. Local schools added new programs about respect and diversity, but they didn't just teach from textbooks. They invited elderly residents like the Evans to share their life stories with students. Young people listened with new understanding as they heard firsthand accounts of courage and perseverance in the face of discrimination. The two reformed teens became regular visitors to the Evans home, not for community service, but because they genuinely enjoyed spending time with the couple. Mrs. Evans taught them about gardening, showing them how to nurture things and help them grow, both plants and people. Mr. Evans shared his baking secrets, teaching them that the most important ingredient in any recipe was love. 1 year after the incident, the Evans hosted a different kind of gathering. They invited everyone who had helped them rebuild, physically and emotionally, to celebrate not just their recovery, but the birth of a stronger community. The party lasted well into the evening, with neighbors sharing food, music, and laughter under strings of twinkling lights. Their home became more than just a house on a street. It became a living reminder that hate could be transformed into love, that darkness could be overcome by light. People would bring their children to see the garden, telling them the story of how their community stood up against hatred and grew stronger because of it. The Evans continued their tradition of kindness, but now they had an entire neighborhood helping them spread it. Their porch lights still stayed on every evening, welcoming anyone who needed a place to belong. And in the end, what was meant to break their spirit had instead created an unbreakable bond between neighbors, proving that when hate tries to divide us, love can draw us even closer together. The autumn breeze carried the sweet smell of fresh cookies through the neighborhood as kids walked home from school. The Evans house, once a target of hate, had become something even more special than before. The sound of laughter and friendly chatter filled their front yard, where dozens of folding chairs now sat permanently arranged in a welcoming circle. The neighborhood had changed in beautiful ways nobody could have predicted. Every Thursday evening, you find teenagers sitting on the Evans porch, listening to stories about courage and kindness. These weren't forced community service visits. These young people came because they wanted to learn from a couple who had faced hatred with grace. 3 high school students had started a weekly gathering they called Cookie Talks. They'd help Mr. Evans bake his famous treats while talking about tough subjects like bullying and discrimination. The kitchen became a place where honest conversations happened naturally, hands covered in flour while hearts opened up to understanding. The garden that had once been trampled now flourished with help from unexpected hands. Every weekend, different families took turns helping Mrs. Evans tend to her flowers. Little children learned to plant seeds while their parents learned lessons about growing a stronger community. The roses bloomed brighter than ever, as if they too were celebrating this new chapter. Local businesses joined in their own way. The hardware store started a Paint It Forward program, offering free supplies to anyone wanting to help elderly neighbors with home maintenance. The supermarket created a special display of baking ingredients, inspired by Mr. Evans' famous cookie recipes, with all profits going to anti-bullying programs in schools. The old wooden fence that had been covered in hateful graffiti was transformed into something beautiful. Art students from the local high school painted a mural showing hands of all colors joined together. Below it, they added the words, "Kindness grows here," in bright, hopeful letters. People would stop to take pictures, sharing the message far beyond their small community. What touched the Evans most wasn't the physical changes, but how their home had become a place of healing for others. Young people struggling with their own battles against bullying found comfort there. Parents brought their kids to learn about standing up for what's right. Even some of the former bullies' families came, seeking to understand and make amends. The couple's wedding anniversary became an annual community celebration, not just of their love for each other, but of the neighborhood's unity. Tables stretched down the street, filled with dishes from every culture. Children played together while their parents shared stories, proving that the best way to fight darkness was by creating more light. During these gatherings, you'd often find Mrs. Evans teaching young girls her secret pie recipes, while Mr. Evans showed boys how to tie a proper necktie. These simple moments of connection meant more than any grand gesture. They were building bridges between generations, between cultures, between hearts. The local news came back 1 year later, not to report on hate, but to show how a community had turned pain into purpose. They found the Evans doing what they'd always done, sharing cookies with neighbors, tending their garden, and making everyone feel welcome. But now they weren't doing it alone. Now they had a whole neighborhood of helpers and friends. The teens who had tried to hurt them had accidentally created something powerful instead, a movement of kindness that kept growing stronger. Other neighborhoods started copying their community programs. Schools invited the Evans to speak about resilience. What began as an act of hate had sparked a wave of positive change that nobody could have predicted. As the sun set each evening, the Evans would sit in their porch swing, holding hands just like they had for over 50 years. But now they weren't just watching their own garden grow. They were watching their entire community bloom with love, proving that the strongest response to hatred is not more hatred, but an abundance of kindness that leaves no room for darkness to grow.